It is 3:03 a.m. on August 8, 1963. A Royal Mail train is traveling south from Glasgow to London. Inside, a postal worker is sorting registered mail and other shipments when the train slows down and then comes to a halt. At first, he doesn't react. Signal failures are not unusual, and delays can happen. But after several minutes, the train is still not moving, and no message has come from the driver. He opens the door at the front of his carriage. He expects to see the next car, but instead he sees an empty track. The engine and the first two carriages are gone. They've been uncoupled and moved further down the line. The carriage that was directly behind the engine is not an ordinary postal car. It is a high-value package coach known as an HVP for short. And tonight, that HVP is carrying over £2.6 million in cash. Half a mile down the line, a group of men is waiting in anticipation. They have disabled the signal system, they've cut the phone lines, and they know exactly which carriage they want. In less than 15 minutes, 120 mail bags will be removed from the train, and before the first alarm is raised, the men will be gone. This is the story of the most audacious robbery in British history. The planning behind it, the men who carried it out, and the mistake that made sure none of them would ever truly escape it. This is the Great Train Robbery. The men behind the robbery were not strangers to crime. They were part of a loose network of professional thieves based in London known as the Southwest Gang. Unlike street criminals or opportunists, this group specialized in high-value jobs, security vans, jewelry warehouses, and cash in transit. Their reputation was built on planning and not violence. At the center of the group was a man by the name of Bruce Reynolds. He was not a mastermind in the traditional sense, but rather a coordinator, someone who brought the right people together. Reynolds believed that crime was not just about profit. It was about control, preparation, and executing a job cleanly. His closest associates included Gordon Goody, Charlie Wilson, Buster Edwards, and Roy James. Each man had a specific role. Goody handled contacts and information. Wilson managed logistics. Edwards sourced vehicles and equipment, while James was the getaway specialist. Together, they had carried out several major robberies, but none of them compared to what was about to come. The opportunity arrived through an inside source, a senior Royal Mail employee known as the Ulsterman. He had access to train schedules, security procedures, and shipment volumes. And in the summer of 1963, he provided a crucial tip. One particular train traveling from Glasgow to London would be carrying an unusually large amount of cash because of a bank holiday. In the early 1960s, British banks still transported physical cash by rail. Large sums were transported from regional banks to the Bank of England in London. The system was fast, but it relied on routine, and routine creates patterns. On August 8, 1963, a backlog of unsent cash from a Scottish bank holiday meant that one train would be carrying several days' worth of money. Not hundreds of thousands, but millions. The money was stored in a high-value package coach, or HVP, a special carriage designed for valuable cargo. In theory, these coaches were supposed to have alarms, reinforced doors, and radios. In practice, however, most of them did not. Only 3 HVP coaches in the entire system had modern security installed, and none of them were scheduled for that night. The target carriage would be unprotected. Thanks to the Ulsterman, Reynolds and his gang now knew 2 things: where the money would be and when it would pass. The only remaining problem was how to stop a moving train. The Southwest Gang had never hijacked a train before, and so they recruited help. Another group known as the South Coast Raiders, criminals with experience targeting rail systems. They also brought in a signal specialist, someone who understood exactly how trackside signals worked. British Railways at the time used a simple two-light system. Green meant proceed and red meant stop. The plan was to interfere with the signal at a remote location called CS Crossing. A red light would force the train driver to stop. Then the engine would be taken. Phone lines would be cut and the train would be driven to a secluded bridge where the rest of the crew would be waiting. That location was Bridgetown Bridge, isolated, no nearby towns, and easy vehicle access. Every step was timed, and every man had a role. They even recruited a retired train driver to operate the locomotive. On paper, the plan was flawless, but in reality, one detail would nearly destroy it. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the train reached CS Crossing. The green signal was covered, and a battery-powered red light was activated. The driver applied the brakes and brought the train to a halt. When his assistant attempted to use the trackside phone, the line was dead. He was intercepted, restrained, and told not to shout. Moments later, the driver was confronted as well. He resisted and was struck in the head with an iron bar. The retired train driver was brought forward to move the train, but when he entered the cabin, he froze. The controls were unfamiliar, and he didn't know how to operate a modern diesel engine. The only person who could drive the train was now lying on the floor, bleeding from the head. They forced him to continue, and under threat and duress, he drove the engine and the HVP carriage half a mile to Bridgetown Bridge. There, a human chain was formed. Mail bags were passed from carriage to truck one after another. By 3:30 a.m., a total of 120 bags had been removed. Only 8 bags were left behind, not because the gang didn't want them, but because it was time to move it along. The gang returned to their safe house, a remote property known as Leatherslade Farm. While they had expected to find a significant amount of cash, the actual haul was £2.6 million, equivalent to more than £60 million today, and that far exceeded their expectations. The money was stacked on tables and counted by hand. Some celebrated, while others felt uneasy. That night, they drank beer and played Monopoly using real banknotes. By morning, the news was everywhere. The robbery had been dubbed the Great Train Robbery, a national scandal.
An announcement by the police that they believe the money was not merely still in this country, but still within 30 miles of the scene of the crime.
With the police closing in and a £260,000 reward for information being offered, the gang decided to leave Leatherslade Farm. But they made one fatal assumption. They assumed that Leatherslade would be cleaned and destroyed afterwards, but it never was. A local farmer reported the property. The police arrived, and what they found inside was astonishing. Mail bags, cash wrappers, burnt clothing, and over 300 fingerprints on bottles, furniture, and even on the Monopoly board. Leatherslade revealed everything: how many men were involved, what vehicles they used, and where they had been sitting. It was a forensic map of the entire operation. Now, the police had a list, and all they needed were matches. The case was handed to the flying squad, led by Detective Tommy Butler. Within weeks, the arrests had begun. Fingerprints were matched and receipts were recovered. One man had paid 3 months' rent using only £10 notes. Another man had tried to flee across rooftops in London, but the flying squad had caught him. By early 1964, most of the crew was in custody. The sentences ranged up to 30 years, but 2 men were still missing: Charlie Wilson and Bruce Reynolds. Wilson had escaped prison in August of 1964 and fled to Canada. He lived under a false identity until he was tracked down and arrested again. Years later, he was murdered under mysterious circumstances. Reynolds, on the other hand, had vanished. Belgium, Mexico, Canada, and later France. He burned through his fortune and eventually he returned to London. In 1968, he was arrested in his own bedroom in front of his son and his wife. When Tommy Butler entered the bedroom, he only said, "Hello, Bruce," and Reynolds replied, "C'est la vie." Of the £2.6 million stolen, less than £350,000 was ever recovered. The rest was spent, hidden, or lost. The robbery changed Britain's security systems forever. Rail cash transport was phased out. Signals were modernized and systems adapted. As for the Southwest Gang, not so much. Most died quietly and some became celebrities, but none of them kept the money. The perfect crime had been executed, but perfection, as it turned out, only existed for 15 minutes. Turns out our heist wasn't perfect after all. Check out this other video and see how 60 years later, the FBI would catch Nigeria's greatest scammer.